What's the most famous event you've personally witnessed? I was on the other side of the 405 for the O.J. Simpson pursuit. I was 7 and my idiot dad pulled over so we could watch an idiot on the other side of the road. I watched Michael Kennedy accidentally ski into a tree and kill himself at Aspen on my Challenger disaster. I interned there the summer before and was watching the launch from outside my dorm room in Orlando. Little known to most people, there was a water main break in the parking lot behind the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora, Colorado the night of the shooting. I was a utility locator at the time and I was on call. My job was to find the gas, electric and phone lives in the area of the break. We were working less than 100 feet from the door the shooter used. The reports stated the shooting started at 12:35 a.m. The next morning when I heard about it and where it was, I looked up my report that gets timestamped when it is completed. I closed the report and left the site at 12:32 a.m., 3 minutes before the shooting started. Maybe not quite that famous outside of my state, but I was one of the several thousand stranded on the street and ended up sleeping in my car overnight during the Atlanta snow jam of 2014. I remember writhing in pain because I had to pee, but then I remembered I had a large Chick-fil-A cup in the car, so that helped. I remember leaning the seat back, turning the heat on and off, hoping I won't run out of gas. I remember my parents calling every 10 minutes. I remember pulling into a BP station after finally being able to move the next morning. Got some gas, used the bathroom, then bought a packet of Pop-Tarts and a drink. That food tasted like manna. I remember prior to leaving, calling my parents at around 11 a.m. from work. The snow was lightly coming down. My mom said, "Come home now." She said it was really piling on there. I remember it took me 26 hours from the time I left work until the time I got home. I also called my boss that morning and said I wasn't coming in. He asked if I made it home. Nope, I'm on I-20 under the Westview Circle overpass. His response? That's something you never forget. I was in 1WTC when it was bombed in 1993. It took me 4 hours to get out. My nose was so full of smoke, if I pinched it, it would crack. In a panic, someone broke a window on the 66th floor. I poked my head outside to see if people were evacuating. I was in the opening band at the last Sex Pistols show, January 1978. I saw the launch of Voyager I from the press site at the Kennedy Space Center. That was pretty cool. I was a performer in the 2012 London Olympic opening ceremony. Performed in front of nearly every world leader, king, queen, prime minister and president. 80,000 people in the stadium and something like 2/3 billion viewers around the world on TV. When my section finished and we had to exit the field of play, we ran past all the athletes who were waiting to go in for the athletes parade. We were high-fiving them as we ran past and I high-fived Usain Bolt. That was a pretty cool night. My grandfather took me out to see Hale Bopp on its brightest day. He told me it may seem insignificant but no one I will ever know will ever see it again and that I would remember it for the rest of my life. He was right. I was in the club when Dimebag Darrell was killed. I was 19 and I actually worked at the club. I'm pretty sure I was one of the first calls to 911 that night. The shooter ran right past me as I was standing backstage by the stage. I ran out the back door and I remember showing the cop who killed the shooter where the door was. I was at the Hilton in Dubai when the Israeli Secret Service checked in with fake British passports and assassinated a Hamas leader who was staying there. We had a lot of explaining to do of why we weren't also badass secret agents. In 1984, I was working at Great Adventure theme park in NJ. There was a fire in the haunted house and 8 teens died. I worked in the parking lot and helped keep the lanes open for the fire trucks to get in. Later that night when leaving work, there were only 2 cars left in the guest parking lot and you knew they belonged to those poor kids. I was there during 9/11 just down about a mile away on Liberty Street. I saw F-registered sign Licks Hernandez's perfect game in Seattle in 2012. I was at MGM Studios in Orlando when Michael Jackson was there with Macaulay Culkin. They walked right past us. Macaulay was wearing an Indiana Jones hat and eating an ice cream cone or something. I got to hold the Olympic torch as it came through the city on the way to the London 2012 games. I was in the Superdome in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina. I saw the Wiggles preform, was in the front row seats. I saw all 3 of American Pharaoh's races to win the Triple Crown. I was at the Magic tournament with a butt crack guy. During the LA riots there was a curfew. Being dumb 20-some things we decided to go out anyway. Drove by the mall and 4 Nation Guards pointed their rifles at us. Was bored when the OJ trial was going on so decided to go to the courthouse. Saw the lawyers coming out. And when the cops were chasing him, OJ drove by my house the one day I decided to work late. Watched him go by it on TV. My friend lived a block from Nicole's house and no one but residents could go into the area. So saw the aftermath. Sad. Used to work for Roseanne when she had her show. Although you young'uns probably don't know much about her. She was all over the news back in the day. I watched US Airways Flight 1549 land in the Hudson. Pretty surreal. I was at the Mets game when Wilmer Flores started crying on the field when he heard a rumor that he had been traded to the Brewers. I know it's not much but it's all I got. During his Man in Motion World Tour, Rick Hansen stopped to greet me as we were watching him go by in our small town in BC. I was 4 years old, and I suspect he stopped to shake my hand because I was the little kid with the eye patch and he was, obviously, a big advocate for those with disabilities. At the time, I felt very embarrassed for him to stop and single me out. I was very self-conscious and always bullied. Now that I look back on it, it was just a short moment, but a very cool and meaningful one. I was temporarily living near Newtown CT. In December of 2012, I heard the police cars and remember turning to my friend and saying, "Wonder what happened this time." Then I turned on the news. I saw the guy jump from our city hall and impale himself on a flagpole. I saw the SpaceX landing a few weeks ago. I've seen many launches but this was by far the coolest because I always see them go up, never down, and it was going so fast. From my angle I was afraid it was going to crash like a beat it or haha. I was there for the Fort Hood shooting. We had just gotten off work and my buddy and I were just at our barracks and they have a balcony on the outside. Well, we heard a pop over by the SRP building and we assumed that someone discharged their weapon. I was thinking, that dude is screwed. Then I heard a couple more pops and we heard people scream and begin running out. I was able to just get off base as they were locking it down. I marched in George W. Bush's first inaugural parade. The local drum corps was invited and were apparently short on membership at the time, so they took to the high school to recruit band kids. I hadn't yet joined the marching band, and so I'd never marched before, but somehow I weaseled my way into that trip. I had absolutely zero business being there. January is a suck-ass time to march if your organization primarily does summer events and had uniforms designed for such climates. It was just about as gorgeous a day as one could expect on a rainy January morning. We huddled behind running police motorcycles huffing CO for warmth waiting to step off. Drew Carey and his crew came by us and laughed at our misfortunes. Even after we were able to step off, the parade kept stopping and starting cause I guess the not my president types were trying to pelt the guy with eggs or something. Eventually we navigated enough roads coated in horsehair to make our way down Pennsylvania Avenue past W's viewing stands, and we had to pivot at an angle to play our horns at him. Remember that note about me never marching before and having no business there? As we passed by, they were snapping overhead shots so we could get a commemorative picture later. I'm off step. Close to 100 kids marching in perfect lockstep, and there's me on the wrong ducking foot. I ruined everything. Not me, but my cousin was supposed to be a flight attendant on one of the 9/11 planes. I forgot which one, but one of his co-workers asked him to switch shifts with her. I was working in London the weekend of the Bishopsgate bombing. From where I was on the Pentonville Road, we heard a loud sudden bang like there was a big car crash outside. So we went out onto the street. No car crash. People were looking away from King's Cross, and that's when it hit me. There wasn't the sound of brakes before the bang. You could see the smoke coming from somewhere in the distance but there was no smell of fire. I was in the Pentagon on 9/11. I was at Woodstock 99 when the riot broke out. Not a fun time. I was in Nikon 9-11. Went to Obama's first inauguration concert at the Lincoln Memorial. And was in DC for the earthquake. I accidentally dripped water on Andy Griffith's shoes and pants while sharing an elevator with him at the Outer Banks. He was not happy as he was apparently needed to be on the set. And dry. He was a small man. And bitter. I was there when Barry Bonds broke the home run record. The helicopter flying out of control before it crashed in Nolan's second Batman movie, the one with the Joker. I was working that night. In a windowed conference room, 22nd floor, and that helicopter was literally right outside our window, flying above the much shorter building across the street. At the time, I wasn't sure if it was part of the movie, or if it was filming from the air, but it was flying around all crazy like. It wasn't until I saw the crash scene in the movie that I understood its role and why it was flying around all crazy like. Kinda freaked me out at the time, and to this day, I still wonder. How much do you pay a pilot like that? A pilot who can fly in a manner that appears to be out of control while still maintaining control in a major downtown metropolis, surrounded by high-rise office buildings. I was at the WWF Over the Edge pay-per-view in Kansas City and watched wrestler Owen Hart, Blue Blazer, fall to his death. Sad night. 4th and 26 Green Bay at Eagles 50-yard line. Some of the stuff that went down in Ferguson. I heard the Columbia Space Shuttle explosion. The ending of the Bob Ross Marathon on Twitch where they played the I Believe song. I was outside of the Statville Correctional Center the night John Wayne Gacy was executed. My family had just moved into a neighboring town maybe a month before. We were returning from my grandparents' house in Joliet and spotted a crowd gathered outside the prison. Not sure if my dad knew what was up, but he decided to stop and check it out anyway. People cheered when the death was confirmed. My grandpa lived really close to the World Trade Center. He was nearby for the bombing in 1993 and actually went over to see if he could help. 9/11 he was sitting in his living room and he heard a plane flying. So he looked out his window and saw it and thought to himself, that plane is flying really low, way too low, that's not normal. Something is wrong. Then the plane went out of his sight and a few seconds later he heard it hit the tower. I've just always thought that was an interesting story. I was one of the first responders to an elephant attack. If you watch the video in this article, at the very end you can see some people's feet and legs just outside of the bars at the top. I'm pretty sure that was me, a teenage volunteer at the time, along with a couple of other zoo employees. What initially got our attention was the sound of an elephant trumpeting. They are pretty quiet animals. Then we noticed Louis, the young bull, up near the bars, and then, beyond him on the other side of the cage, his trainer, slumped against the wall. We couldn't immediately see what was wrong with the trainer. He looked ashen and was clutching his chest. We all assumed he was having a heart attack. We sprinted through the back passages of the elephant house. Luckily I knew the way, and out to the front just as he stumbled out and fell over. That's when we saw the blood. Several visitors had already called 911 and were able to tell us what happened. And the other employees had significant medical training and radios to summon the medic and security and everybody else. Being a teen volunteer with very little training in elephant attack emergencies, I did the most useful thing I could think to do. I ran to open the back gates for the ambulances. I will say this, you know that scene in Jurassic World where the raptors are advancing on the worker who fell in? They did their research for that scene. It felt way too familiar. Not nearly as famous as some of the other things being said in this thread, but I was working with Guardian helping prep the pilots who made all those airstrike bombing runs against ISIS about a year ago, and it was on the news. The same pilots who had video footage of their airstrikes leaked on the internet were the same guys I ate lunch with after they made those runs. I hope internet famous counts. I remember the day when Friday by Rebecca Black came out. I sat down and watched. For a good 2 hours the comments just pouring in at a rate faster than YouTube could even handle. Every last one was the same hate over and over. The Boston Marathon bombing. I was working right around the corner. Heard the 2 blasts. Then looked down from the 40th floor of my building. And saw all the red. It was gut-wrenchingly horrific. comma. The evacuation of Saigon in 1975. I was at the 1989 World Series between the Giants and A's and was in the 7.0 earthquake at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. The escalators stopped and everyone cheered, thinking how cool it was that an earthquake happened right before the game. Once we got to our seats, a guy had a portable TV and we saw the Bay Bridge broken and the freeways collapsed. It wasn't cool after that, and the game was postponed. I saw the Chelyabinsk meteor fly over me when it hit Western Russia back in 2013. Not sure if this is known outside of Europe, but it was a pretty big deal seeing the sky turn bright green from that thing. I was in Watertown, MA, a few blocks away when the Boston Marathon bombers were in a shootout with police. My buddy and I left in a panic, and as we drove further away, literally hundreds of police cruisers were flying in the opposite direction, coming out of almost every intersection. All you could see were sirens flashing blue lights everywhere. Never seen anything quite like it. Felt like Gotham. I saw Spiro Agnew give a stump speech from the back of a train car. Was too young to heckle. My old man was in the US Air Force and was stationed in Germany. One day, the 9th of November 1989, my old man came and took me out of school. I was like, where are we going? My old man was like, Berlin. They're opening the wall and we're gonna witness history. I also had my first beer that day. Edit. As others have pointed out details, I was probably there the evening 10th. The day after the wall officially fell and not the 9th when it literally did. I was only 10 at the time, and in memory it was more of a cool trip with my dad than a witnessing history thing, so I had to Google the date. We probably went the next day, which would be in line with my memories of being there the weekend. The 10th was a Friday. Still cool to me though. Phoenix Lights. I don't have a theory as to what it was. Flares, I guess. Definitely not aliens. Hurricane Katrina from uptown New Orleans. I was a few houses down from Nicolas Cage and his pregnant wife. They had dogs there too. After the storm rolled past, he had a cleanup crew come. We walked around, met nice French tourists from out of town and marveled over all the trees and debris down. During the storm, I recall watching water go up the roof of homes. Trees just fall and take earth with them, like the hand of God himself knocked them like chess pieces on a board. Power never came back on. Days and days later. So, we worked for the Times-Picayune, so we got word a levees broke and we left town easily. I'll never forget seeing electricity and running water at that restaurant we stopped in. I looked at the lights in the ceiling and smiled and said, whoa, you never know how much you miss simple things in life until they're gone. I was in North Dakota in 1997 when practically the entire state's power grid was knocked out by a freak snowstorm. It happened just a few days after all the snow had melted and dumped more snow in one day than the entire winter before it. Then it melted really fast and flooded Grand Forks and Fargo. There was also a huge fire in one of the cities. President Clinton came to North Dakota to encourage us. One of the few times I think a president has been to North Dakota. Malice at the Palace. Detroit Pistons vs. Indiana Pacers. Big brawl broke out. I was at Fort Mart State Park in Pennsville, NJ when Andrew Cunanan killed William Rees, stole his truck, headed to Miami and killed Versace. I took this photo of Bethany Arsenault, the woman who was kidnapped by her ex and then rescued by her family. That was an unforgettable day. Saw Henry Aaron hit number 714 in Cincinnati, long ago. My family and I were vacationing in Nantucket when JFK Jr.'s plane went down. We could see the search helicopters and boats out in the distance. I was on the ship that just rescued 10 detained Navy sailors in Iran this week. I was only a kid and stayed inside mostly, but I've seen a little bit of the LA riots. Not necessarily personal, but my ex-boyfriend was working at the American Apparel in Santa Monica when Amanda Bynes came in, looking like a zombie girl in a wig. On the day she was 51/50D after starting a fire in her neighbor's driveway. He came home frizzled that night and told me what happened. I admit, I was jealous. I watched rescue workers pull a little girl named Jessica McClure out of a well in a backyard in Midland, TX in late 1987. Back in the late 80s or early 90s, my dad had a patient come into his rheumatology practice. During the exam, my dad and this guy started chatting. I can't remember how the conversation exactly unfolded, but this guy, who was in his late 80s or early 90s, starts talking about his days as a radio operator in one of the ports in New York City, and then drops how he had been one of the operators who had received the distress call from the ducking Titanic. He referred to the radio system as the Marconi, after the inventor, and apparently back then distress calls weren't referred to as SOS, but as CQD. Come quickly. Danger. Lived in Longview, Washington when Mt. Street, Highlands erupted. Interesting day. Our helo was operating near Mogadishu, Somalia in October 1993 when Super 61 and Super 64 were shot down. Black Hawk down. I was assigned to a heavy lift helicopter squadron at the time, and we were asked to see if we could put down at either of the crash sites. The narrow streets made it impossible for our helo to do so. So we made a few passes and returned to our previous mission. Needless to say, our crew felt helpless. Hearing the radio chatter from the guys on the ground still haunts me. Either the rally to restore sanity and or fear, or the Tupac hologram. I was there the first weekend. Both were amazingly awesome. I was one tube stop away from one of the bombs in the London 7/7 bombings. The tube suddenly stopped and they got everyone off with the excuse of power failure. In a very calm Brit voice they asked people to leave the station. Then as we left, all you heard was everyone's phones ringing. A multitude of them. I answered mine, moaning about the ducking tube to my wife, and she just cut me off saying it's a bomb. Get out. My blood turned cold and I hightailed it out of there. I then was extremely lucky to grab a cab, and I remember the entire London on the streets. The media dubbed it a long walk home. Nelson Mandela being released from prison and his first speech to his country.